Nice, man. Colin, how are you?
I'm feeling good, mate. I'm looking forward to reversing the wrongs here today.
I know, well, I was thinking about that earlier. Obviously, we spoke a few weeks ago on your podcast. You are the host, the creator of Cambro Conversations, a podcast that has on YouTube had over 500,000 views and plays and over 250 episodes, which was mind-blowing. I didn't realise it was that much when I was looking the other day, doing a bit of digging through there. Really quite mind-blowing. But yeah, I was on your podcast a few weeks ago. It was great. I'm sure my audience have seen some clips of what's come out of that on Instagram and stuff like that. But earlier I was thinking, when it comes to like the kind of ratio of times that I've been a host on a podcast to times that I've been a guest, I think now it's probably about equal for me. But given the fact that you've done 250 episodes as a host, surely you've not been a guest that many times.
No, not even close. Maybe 30 guest appearances, something like that as well. But my interest in actually starting my own podcast a lot came from doing 5 or 6 guest appearances and enjoying the format and thinking, oh, this is a format I feel really comfortable in. It has a lot of overlap with what I was doing for my day job in terms of holding conversations and meetings and having an agenda and having things that we want to work towards and discuss. And I was like, oh, I think I could contribute to this space. So I think a lot of people that start a podcast have maybe dipped their toe in the format and liked how it felt and been like, oh, maybe I could do this for my own show and maybe have this on a weekly basis or a bi-weekly basis, however often you end up doing your frequency.
Yeah, so interesting. Out of interest, what were the first guest appearance podcastings? What did they come out of? Was it from the sales job? Was it?
I'd grown an audience in 2017, 2018 to about 10,000 followers on Instagram, primarily posting about health and fitness and mindset while traveling the UK in my sales role. So going all over the place. I'd been in pretty good physical shape for 4 or 5 years. I started training through rugby, as we probably discussed before, but really got lean and muscular over that period. And I was posting about it every day on Instagram. And I was going on primarily health and fitness podcasts, talking about what are the habits you do when you're traveling, what are the habits when you work in an office, what are the habits when you work from home, and how are you using this to build your physique. So I probably did 5 or 6 podcasts that were very much like PTs or online coaches that were wanting to talk to a young professional that was balancing both and excelling in both career. And I think there's a big overlap between both, and I'm sure we'll get on to the different habits and behaviours that overlap between success within sales, success within podcasting, success within health and fitness, and success within just general habits within life that are going to serve you well to live on that aligned path that you should be living on or trying to live on.
You cover quite a wide scope of topics. It's really a personal brand, and it seems to be the podcast is about things that you're interested in. When did you start? When was the first episode?
So I released my first episode on the 1st of April 2020. It wasn't an April Fool's joke. It was something I took pretty seriously. But I had been threatening to do it for a long time. So I mentioned those guest podcasts. Those were primarily during 2019. And podcasting was still young then. I know you and Grayson had a show way back in the day.
Yeah.
But that would have been I think nowadays there's something like 4 million podcasts. Now most of those are inactive. They haven't uploaded in the last 2 weeks and whatnot. And there's all these stats that I share around the numbers that fail before a particular episode triggers numbers. But 2019 there was still there was enough podcasts, but it was still quite rare to do a podcast. So when I was doing them, I was like, oh, I really enjoy this. And I graduated uni in 2014. I bought a new MacBook in July 2019 because my old one sounded like an aircraft taking off when you turned it on. I think I probably wouldn't be able to do Zoom recordings or whatever on this. It'll probably blow up mid-recording. So I had every intention of starting the podcast then, but it took until the lockdowns for me to actually take the time that had been saved through some of the restrictions that period in time and apply those to, okay, I'm going to start recording episodes. So I released my first episode on the 1st of April 2020. I'd recorded 6 and I reached out to Chris Williamson, who's the host of Modern Wisdom podcast, huge fan of his show. And back then in 2020, I thought it was huge. I thought it was amazing. But what it's gone on to become is colossal. So Chris was my first guest.
Was he?
And he got things started for me and was a really big launch pad because he's somebody that I look up to in the self-development space. I think he's somebody that has worked on himself over and over and over again in lots of different domains, and of course a great conversationalist. So that was my launch back in April 2020 of all times.
Well, that's mental. At that point, Modern Wisdom, how big a following did he have?
It probably had about 100,000 on YouTube, and however many that equates to on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You mentioned my YouTube's got 500,000 plays. My audio has got considerably more than that, because that's been the platform that I've focused on. And I think...
How many?
Probably about 750,000. Yeah.
Wow.
And that grows a lot faster because I did a lot of remote episodes. I think they aren't as aesthetically pleasing for YouTube. Whereas we're sat in a lovely studio today. If you're a Glasgow-based guest or a Scotland-based guest, or Dubai or Marbella, as it's turned out in more recent years, I've been able to do that in person in a nice studio. But a lot of that archive at the 250 have been during lockdown restrictions, or they've been with guests that are global and based all over the place. So I've done it over StreamYard. So I think that's harder to grow a YouTube audience doing. But Modern Wisdom back then was still, in my opinion, a brilliant show. I thought Chris was covering amazing topics. He'd interviewed some great people at that point, and James Clear, Aubrey Marcus, some people that I really, really look up to and really, really enjoy their content. But what it's gone on to become with David Goggins and Jordan Peterson and Jocko Willink and whoever else has been on that show, it really is, it's a known now, whereas before it was a bit more like, oh, if you know, you know, you would have listened to it. So yeah, he was somebody that I had tremendous respect for. I was just, quote unquote, a really engaged listener. And if you think about the stage that Black Spot's at just now, there'll be people that message you about particular episodes, and the feedback you get at this stage when it's very formative and you're deciding which way you want to go with the show, you really take that seriously, and the volume of feedback you get is manageable, that you can reply to the message, you can really engage with what they're saying. I guess I was probably that listener for Chris at that point. And I think he was launching a sobriety course. Again, he's a big proponent, like myself, of elective sobriety, where you take sustained concentrated breaks from alcohol without it necessarily being something you need to do because of an addiction. And he was launching that course, and I think he sent me the promo video for it. I was probably what you would consider a hot lead at that point. And we had a bit of back and forth, and I think he took what I said quite seriously, because from a sales background I was saying, oh, one of the things about your promo video, you could definitely focus more on what the after impacts are of what the course provides. So rather than listing the features and benefits of the course, list what happens after somebody does this course, what they unlock in their life, because that helps people put themselves in the shoes. And so we had a lot of back and forth about that. And then I was very much like, P.S. you very much inspired me to start a podcast. I would love if you were my first guest. And we were all during that early period of lockdown where it was quite strict before we kind of maybe rebelled a little bit, Adam. And we had the time to book in an hour and a half on a Monday night, and we just recorded and chatted, and it was an amazing way to start the show. Yeah,
that's a great guest. Is it just once he's been on the podcast, or?
Just once. I have a good relationship with Chris. During 2021 and 2022, we did a couple of different brand things together. A brand called Factory Weights, a brand called Slater's Menswear, who a lot of people will be aware of. We did a couple of shoots and some promo stuff, but I never take the relationship for granted. I think a lot of people in dynamics where they maybe have access to somebody, and my phone book now has been amazing through the podcast, like people that I've really looked up to, but I don't think you ever should try and take the piss or take liberties with that, and try and give as much value as you get up until a point, because at some point the seesaw will swing and he'll be like, oh, I'm happy to introduce you to whatever guest it is that I maybe ask for, but I never really try and ask too much. But I stay in touch with them, and I would love to maybe have him back on for like a milestone episode. So maybe, I think we're about 253 in or something like that at the time of recording. Maybe episode 300, maybe episode 350, whatever it is. I'd love to have Chris back on and probably do that in person, whether that's in Austin where he stays now or whether when he's back in the UK. Yeah,
man. He's like on my YouTube, like I sit on YouTube on my TV at night. I don't watch TV. I basically just watch YouTube. Like occasionally like Netflix or something, like Baby Reindeer or something. That was the most recent thing that I watched, and that was good. But yeah, my missus is like, what's wrong with you, man? You just watch YouTube. But Chris is one of the guys that keeps popping up for me at the moment on there. I think it was a recent episode with Rory Sutherland that was pretty interesting. I got right into that. But you have had some amazing guests. Like, I guess he's one of them that stood out to me. Joe Delaney, Zuby, Rob Lipsett, Sahil Bloom, who's absolutely blown up recently on social media. It's been really cool. I guess like you talk about, as I said earlier, kind of diverse range of topics on your podcast. Like, how would you frame up to my listeners what those topics are?
I think in general it's a self-development podcast, and it's for people who want to pursue a better version of themselves, but that could be in multiple different domains. And I think if I was to be prescriptive, it's probably within the 3 Bs: brain, body, business. Now, business could be career, whether you're an entrepreneur or an entrepreneur. Brain could be mindset, it could be mental health, it could be performance, it could be productivity. And then body, I think that speaks for itself in terms of looking for as good a performance level you can get in that space, whether that's athletic or whether that's aesthetic. It could be both as well. So it opens me up to lots of different avenues, but it's all genuinely geared towards improvement in some regard, whether that's somebody that's gone from like a transformative state, so they've gone from shit to fit, or they've gone from poor to wealthy, or whether they've gone from really crippling mental health to really empowered and in control of how they feel about themselves. That's there as well, but also lots of like scientific based stuff as well. I've had like sleep doctors on, I've had professors and resilience, all these different topics, and I think they've all been guided by content that I would have wanted to see, or content that I still want to see and want to have those conversations, because there's plenty of people like me and my demographic. Most of the people listening to my podcast are between 25 to 35, and they're 80% guys, 20% females. Now, don't get me wrong, there's outliers either side. There's some younger guys that listen to the show, there's some older guys, some older girls that listen to the show, but I'm trying to serve a core audience of people that just want to improve in areas that they're interested in improving in. And sometimes, of course, I bring in a guest that maybe they speak about a topic that somebody's never heard before, but I think I've earned the right now, with the number of episodes that I've done and the sort of quality of production and research and questions that I'm asking, that the listeners trust me, and they're like, oh yeah, of course I'm up for hearing about that. Like, you were the first former rugby player that I had on, but you had a story and a mindset that was really interesting to the type of audience that I've got, and it ticked all the boxes.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And like, I'm assuming over the time that the podcast has been a thing and more episodes have come out, more people you've spoke to, those interests that you now have and you would sort of like pinpoint as things that your personality is just interested in, were not that like at the start. Like, I'm sure there's been a massive development of that over the time.
There's an evolution, isn't there?
Yeah.
I think fundamentally I've stayed true to the course that I was on from the start, but of course things pop up and you become more interested in. So I had a lot of conversations around freedom of speech during the C19 period, because I was quite strongly against how different opinions were being suppressed during that period. I've got some pretty strong views around political correctness and some of the woke ideology that had been enforced upon the UK. So that definitely wasn't something that I planned to speak about on the podcast, but I had guests that were articulate and well spoken and had interesting ideas in that space. And that's not to say that I agree 110% with every guest that comes on, but I can have a back and forth platform and a discussion with them and see where we end up, and the listener can then make up their mind based on that. Although I don't ever really have adversarial podcasts, I don't really get a lot of benefit from that. So yeah, views and interests have definitely fluctuated during that period. One of the things that's probably been the most different for me is I think I've become more spiritual, and I think one of the big missing components from society nowadays, in the gaping hole that we've got, is actually religion. And that's not to say that I am actually a practicing Christian at this stage, but I am very interested to see that as we've lost our cultural Christianity in the UK, we've sort of filled it with little new things. So whether that's the gender ideology debate, whether that's climate activism, whether that's wokeism, or whether that's like extremism in tribal nature towards sports or towards money, we've replaced one God with others. And it's been interesting to watch that, because if I think about myself, like some of the lessons from the Bible which I've become more interested in are things like love thy neighbour. How many people now actually speak to their neighbour or know their name or are actually supportive in the same way? Or how many people feel lonely in a society because they don't spend a Sunday at a place of worship? I find that really interesting, and speaking to people who either have a faith or are spiritual in their nature, I think that's been really interesting for me to consider what society is missing, but also like, what do I want to implement in my own life and for those around me to be a supportive, positive force, albeit it doesn't need to necessarily be done through a formal religion either.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. I think that, like, I'm sure a lot of the people you speak to on your podcast have been through like quite profound transformations. Like, and I think there is just my kind of outlook on that is there is often just a really sort of spiritual element to that. Like, a lot of the time when you go from being pretty concrete in how you see something at one stage to being the opposite or having another complete view of that, like there's something to that. See, out of interest as well, like, I know I actually didn't realise until we spoke about some of the views that you had on COVID and all the things that were happening, and during that time I had been listening to podcasts and stuff like that. I'd like, when these things are happening, I like to try and stay as open as I can and try and take in as much as I can. And it sounded like you were obviously speaking to people at that point that were articulate, were backing things up that they were saying with science or whatever it was that they were talking about. Did you have to think at that point, is this a road that I want to go down with my show and with my brand? And how did that sort of unfold for you? Because the reason I ask is because I on my own social media platforms, there was things happening that I wasn't happy about, and I thought, what the hell, this is ridiculous. And I spoke out about it, and literally
you
overnight,
got some backlash on Twitter, yeah.
Yeah, I was getting some stuff on Twitter. My followers, I lost about 1,000 followers, just plummeted over the space of like 2 or 3 days. But this was at the early stages, and I think now that wouldn't happen because we're at a different place now.
That's true, but there'll be another thing that comes up, and if people don't see your worldview or don't allow you to express your worldview at that point in time and deplatform you or unfollow you or shout you down, they'll fall for the same, I don't want to say tricks, but the same issues that came up at that time. Mm-hmm. I didn't make it the sole focus of the show. I'm uploading an episode every single Sunday for 4 years. So very few of the episodes are primarily focused on that, but a percentage of them around the time when it was the most interesting were on that. Probably the main, most outspoken person on it was Zuby.
Oh yeah,
who has a massive
pretty hard against the COVID stuff.
Yeah, he was really big on that, and he'd been calling out a lot of the different control measures around society in general for a number of years prior to that. And he took what I thought was a pretty fair stance, and the vast majority of my audience were completely happy with that, but a few people visibly objected in terms of messages towards me. But equally, as I said, I could have had somebody who was far more aggressive on the topic than Zuby, but it doesn't mean that that's my exact view.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm just platforming it to have an interesting conversation as well. So yeah, it was definitely a consideration, like, do I want to put my head above the parapet? I will say that given that I'm still in full-time employment, I do have to be conscious that if somebody had a real problem, they could go to my employer. But ultimately, the podcast is very separate from anything that I do in other areas of my life as well. And I like to think that people are mature enough and calm enough that we don't try and enforce cancel culture on somebody for putting something forward. Like you say, of course, you can unfollow and move away from if that's your prerogative. But I also think it's funny when people announce that they're unfollowing. It's not an airport's departures lounge, is it? You're very much like, okay, well, thank you for that. Constructive criticism is welcomed, and I don't expect if somebody from your audience comes across and listens to my pod, I don't think they're going to love all 250 of my guests and everything that they say. In fact, I'd be extremely surprised if you did, because there's some variance in there.
Yeah.
But there's going to be enough in there that you enjoy and get value from that you can go forward with it as well, Adam.
Yeah. You touched on a day job there, so like, and it is like, from the outside, you could be looking at this as one of your listeners or whatever, and you're actually putting a lot of content out on social media, but also just through the podcast and episodes. This isn't what you do full time. This is a side hustle. You're still working on a full time job. What do you do?
Yeah, good question. A lot of people don't even realise that when they maybe come across me on Instagram or even on LinkedIn as well, because I primarily use that platform now because the algorithm is really favourable to push the pod and share content. So I'm a sales director for a furniture firm, and primarily my customers are within the student accommodation space. So we're refurbing the furniture that goes within a student accommodation bedroom and common room area as well across the UK. I've always been in sales from a very early age. At university, I actually was selling contents and gadget insurance to students as part of a company called Ensley Insurance, and I never saw myself as salesy at a young age, but by 18, 19 I was doing it every single summer for 4 or 5 years during university, and I just loved it from the start.
Loved it, like...
genuinely got such a buzz from it, and the skills that you learn from sales, you realise that the vast majority of the conversations and the experiences that we have, a lot of them are sales, albeit not always with fiscal transactions. Either you're persuading somebody to go down the route that you want to do, or you're persuading somebody to take the viewpoint that you're taking, or you're persuading somebody to buy the product that you've got as well. So yeah, I still work full time in the sales industry. I have grown a really good customer base where I am. I've been there for 3 years now, but I still love doing the what I call new. So that's like the customers that have never heard of you, or they've heard of you and they maybe used you 10 years ago, or they've got an incumbent supplier that they love and they go and play golf with and whatever else as well, and you're trying to go in and move them towards you and bring them on your journey as well. Now obviously there's like a process to that that's really hard work, but often on the other side of hard things is like a really tangible, like fulfilling reward. And then we'll maybe talk about hormones and stuff, but I've come to understand that dopamine, is the progress hormone rather than the reward hormone. So when you're working towards something, you're getting all this dopamine, this feel of purpose and energy. And sometimes when you hit it, you're like, okay, great. You need to pause a little bit, but then you just go on to the next thing again to chase the next goal. And I really like that about sales. And I do have a really good understanding of how I'm personally wired to know the kind of things that I should turn my hands towards. Because one of the big questions I'm sure we'll talk about is, how do I get so much done in terms of delivering millions of pounds worth of sales in my day job, but then growing this, touchwood, bit of a behemoth of a podcast that we're working towards. It's largely because I've chosen ventures where I've got a passion for both areas. I've got the systems, I've got the processes, but I've also got the why. And it's a Nietzsche quote that when man has his why, he can bear almost any how. And I really believe that I've got that in the ventures that I've decided to turn my hands towards. And again, one of the phrases that we used on my show was, I like to go narrow but deep. I'm not a polymath. I'm not brilliant across lots of different areas. I have some surface level knowledge that I can hold a conversation about, but I really have my areas of expertise where I just go all in.
That's pretty cool. And would you say you've always been like that? I mean, I'm making an observation about you right now, but you seem like the kind of guy that like you can just keep going. Like you achieve something, that's the next thing. You achieve that, it's the next thing. Has that always been in your nature?
I don't know. I think fitness taught me a lot of that, in terms of when I understood the amount of control I could have of how I looked and how I felt with the inputs that I put in through food, through training, through sleep, through recovery, through the level of stimulus I was giving myself in the gym. I think that was a great turning point for me. I think many people that maybe knew me in my teens would have been surprised by how relentless I am now, because I was quite laissez-faire, quite go with the flow. I didn't have like a really set trajectory. I think I had capability, but it took a lot to unlock that and to drive forward. And if like look at your pro career, a lot of people that maybe knew you at Alva Academy be like, oh, he's got potential. But did they think you were going to end up playing for Scotland? Did they think you were going to end up doing a lot of coaching alongside your role? Did you have those natural characteristics that were always going to happen? Or did different experiences lead you towards that and unlock you within that as well? Or different content? I really believe we are what we consume as well. So I think a lot of things that I've consumed over the years have kind of directed me towards something that is natural, but is definitely nurtured as well.
So have you been at the same sales company for a long time now?
No. I mentioned that I worked for Ensley when I was at university. I joined their account management team when I left uni. They kind of kept tabs on me all the way through uni. And when I graduated, I joined there as an account manager. And that is student insurance sector. It went from B2C, so selling to students direct, to then selling to the universities and the student accommodation providers, like the big PBSA halls. Many people will recognise in their city brands like Unite or Liberty Living or Vita or whoever else as well. So that was very much an industry where it was relatively sized, but I knew that I could be involved in quote unquote bigger stuff. And I was learning and developing during that time. And I kept going down the insurance route, and I moved to an insurance broker called Marsh, which is like one of the biggest insurance brokers in the world. It was the biggest when I was there. I think there's been a merger that's changed that. But insurance is also quite slow and quite old. And I spent 18 months there, and I learned a tremendous amount. I was in their sales academy scheme, and some of the lessons that I learned there are stuck with me for life, and I've managed to use those in the things that I've gone on to do. But 3 years ago, I moved industry from insurance into furniture, primarily driven by the fact that the deals were of a bigger size and the percentage profit was higher. Like in my Marsh days, a big deal would be like a 10 grand fee for the business. Like a big deal in furniture is like 100 grand, 150 grand, and that's at like a 50% profit. So it's radically different. So as a salesperson, the vehicle's really important, Adam. Like if you look at a pro career in rugby, like you're good friends with Finn Russell, for example, the vehicle matters. You can get paid more playing for Bath or Racing than you can for Glasgow Warriors, because there's more TV money, there's bigger crowds, whatever else as well. So the vehicle really matters that you apply yourself within. So for me, moving from one area of insurance where it was very capped and quite small and quite old, and it maybe would have taken me 3, 4, 5, 6 years more to get to where I wanted to get to in terms of fiscal earnings and also the kinds of deals I got to work on, I was able to move sector and immediately go charging past that. And that's an unusual thing for somebody like me who's got a lot of patience, delayed gratification from training and understanding it's going to take a long time to change your body the way you want it. To go and do that was really, really important. And I think I've learned that through a lot of the podcast guests I've had on as well, who've been like, oh, I was smashing it in one sector, but if I applied the skill set I've got in this sector to another sector that's got bigger leverage, then guess what? I should go and play in the bigger league.
A good way to make more money in sales is just to sell more expensive things. Is that true?
Yeah, absolutely. More expensive things at a higher margin that are maybe recurring as well. So without getting like super into my day job, but furniture and student accommodation gets replaced every year. Now, not the items that I put in, they're going to get replaced over like 3-5 years, but across a portfolio, they're going to need to replace the mattresses, going to need to replace the desk chairs. So it's just constant spend over and over and over again. And then of course they're building brand new stuff that you furnish the entire thing on as well. So it was a really good vehicle. I think the other one that a lot of young guys that speak to me about sales, and maybe I've done some consultancy stuff and some coaching with them, software is huge as well, because the spend that companies make in that space is massive. You've spoken to me before about Zapity and cloud storage and transfer of files. These are the coming things, and businesses will spend accordingly on things that are really fundamental to their business. And for me, the vehicle really does matter. The industry matters. The product matters. And if you're great at selling in one industry, you'll have to do a bit of product knowledge and some learning to be credible. And I think that's important. But you can really fiscally change the game if you apply yourself in the area that's going to pay you the most, or pay you the most per deal or the most per transaction.
Yeah. I think back to when I was maybe 18, 19, 20. I always thought sales had a bit of like a bad rap. And it does have a bad rap because or bad rep because, like it's an uncomfortable thing to have to do. Like when you're going to go and sell to someone and you're going to try and convince them that they should buy this thing and it's going to help them. I couldn't have run further from that, honestly. Like as the type of person that I was probably somebody who wanted to kind of just fit in. Like it took me a bit of time to find myself. And that probably didn't happen until I was 22, 23 years old. But it sounds to me like you were maybe almost like on the opposite side of the spectrum there. Like you were quite comfortable in doing that. And you could see that what you were learning was going to benefit you massively further down the line. When I think about sales now, sales is something I'm massively interested in. Persuasion, copy, things like that. Like these are things that every successful entrepreneur or business person needs to know. But would you say that you were just kind of a little bit more naturally inclined to approach these types of circumstances more? Or
in my early days, because I was doing face-to-face sales with either students who were arriving at university for the first time or their parents that were arriving with them as well, I learned a couple of things. One, facing rejection, because you're going to get told no more times than you're going to get told yes. If 1,000 students are moving in on a Saturday at Murano Halls in Glasgow, they're moving to Maryhill for the first time, they're bringing their MacBook and their iPhone and their sewing machine. Some of the funny stuff that we insured was bananas, mate, honestly. First of all, you learned that more people were going to say no than yes. Either there was going to be an objection that was going to come up, and a lot of the objections were the same, and you started to learn you've got a wee list, a wee cheat sheet of like how to handle that. And eventually you didn't have to keep looking at the sheet because you knew what was coming and you knew what might come next and maybe how you could overdeal with that. And you were also surrounded by other people within a team. And this is something that harks back to my rugby days. It's great to be surrounded by people that are pulling or pushing towards the same goal. So you all want the same thing. So I was sat on a table with other guys that were all working towards the same target for the day. We knew that there were particular policies that were more popular than others that we were all going to try and land with the with the client as well. And it was needs based as well. I think you were saying there that sales gets a bad reputation for good reason, because sometimes it's like pushy. But if it was like, if you were like maybe asking questions that were consultative to understand what somebody cared about and what they were bringing with them that mattered, I was like, okay, well, I'm actually giving you a solution. It might not be the solution for you. It might be an affordability thing. It might be you have cover elsewhere. Whatever the reason is, that's cool. But I'm going to present the options that I've got, and I'm going to be willing to face the no and chase the no, because I'd rather get a no than a let me think about it, because it was very much on the day, because I was getting paid by what was getting done on the day and transacting at that moment in time. So that was really helpful. And the reason I mentioned that there was both students and parents there, you had to adjust your pitch and how you spoke based on who you were speaking to. Because mum and dad probably care more about the fact that the new Acer laptop or the new Asus laptop or the new MacBook they've bought their kid is going to be replaced while they live 100 miles away in Durham when their kid's going to Glasgow Uni. and the kid probably cares more about the fact it's going to get replaced really quickly so that they can get on with their studies and not miss the deadline for their essay, or maybe they care that they can get accidental damage cover on their phone because they know they're probably going to drop it or smash it on a night out, or it's going to get dropped in a pint of lager at the student union. All these things were just really interesting for me, and it's funny me thinking back now to all these different things that I did well over a decade ago, but those different traits and skills stick with me and they roll off my tongue really quickly because I said them so many times back in the day.
Yeah. One of the other things that's quite similar to this, but it's not this, is dating. Like, can you see the similarities between rejection and being able to almost like face a no? Is that it's a question more than anything, like, in people that have had sales training and have like faced the no so many times, does it become easier as a young person to like go on a date?
Isn't it? Yeah, I've not even thought about it. I'm not notorious for going up and dropping game. That's not really my style. Yeah, I've got friends that don't work in sales, but they're well known for nightclub res or beach club res. It's interesting. I do think rejection in one area should, in theory, lead to rejection in others, but also good salespeople should detach the no from it being about them personally. Whereas I think in dating, the no can really only really be about you or the version of you that you presented. Whereas with sales, you're selling a product. In the same way, I suppose, if you were pitching Pure Sport back in the day when you and Grayson were getting it started, it probably felt more personal if somebody said no. Whereas now, there's a massive team that grows at whatever else as well. And if you say to somebody, oh, we've just launched our new salty hydration or whatever, and somebody says, oh no, that's not for me, it doesn't hurt as much as when you're getting it started back in the day and it's the first dropper with the CBD oil in it, and somebody says no, you'd be like, oh, that hurts. So I think there's an element of a different kind of rejection, because if you're a salesperson, you should be thinking about the product being rejected or the service being rejected, not you. Whereas in dating, I think it's probably you that's getting the hurt or the no.
Yeah. How do you separate that? You know, like it is you that's getting rejected, I guess. Yeah, but I guess you have to try. I'm
sure there'll be dating coaches out there that can teach you to compartmentalise.
I think there would be a lot of links between that. For me, my experience in sales, the couple of companies that I'm really involved in, Pure Sport and Zappity, and the one thing that I would say about certainly Pure Sport at the beginning, and I'd say the same about Zappity, but like when I was selling, for instance, on an investment call, and we're trying to raise funds to grow the company or whatever, the one thing that made it easier was really believing in the product. Like when you're really clear about the benefits and you're sold yourself and you're using it and you're like, oh, maybe not in all cases you would use it, but for me, I was using CBD and it helped me in all these different ways. It made the job a lot easier. Is that a big compartment? I
think it's massive. You've got to believe in it, and that's the whole Nietzsche thing. If you've got your why, you can bear anyhow. Now, I think all salespeople should be financially motivated, and they should care about the bonus or the income that they're going to get, but they should also care about the customer result. So, for example, am I going to solve a pain point or a problem for this customer and improve their life or their outcomes off the back of it as well? And you can distill that down into whatever it is. So, for example, if I've got a landlord that's got a portfolio of student properties, I'm solving the pain point of him changing the furniture over when they've got a 3-day turnaround before the new tenants move in, and guess what, he's going to get a higher rental yield because the furniture looks better for the photos for the website. It's going to be durable, the students are going to give him a good customer experience score. So I can talk myself into how important and valuable that is. But I think if I was selling like something that was like snake oil basically, and you weren't comfortable with it, then it's a lot more so. And I don't think I've got the personality type, and I think a lot of the people that listen to podcasts like yours and mine, they probably have got too strong morals to go and sell something they don't care about, and your whole why would be really built on sand at that point. You need to have something that you have faith in that produces a good result, and it doesn't have to be immediately obvious. It doesn't have to be as powerful probably as something like Pure Sport, where you're like, we can physically change how somebody feels about their injuries or their pain, and it's really, really clear. Or it could be, oh, I'm actually solving a financial problem for them so that their investment portfolio produces better results. Or you could distill it down into whatever you want.
Yeah. As my real experiences that I've had in sales have been mostly through fundraising money and trying to sell that to people. Now, obviously, the companies that I work in, we sell products, but in some ways, it's not a face-to-face sale. It's e-commerce. It's different. So that's been interesting. But yeah, I personally am really interested. I want to keep growing my knowledge, improve. And I think persuasion, ethical persuasion is such an important thing as the world starts to change. I think it's probably something that the likes of AI is going to struggle with, you know, and I think there's definite opportunity there, especially if you want to go down the route of business. But
you can future-proof yourself, Adam, through being a good communicator, being persuasive and moving people in a direction that is in line with your values and it solves a problem for them, then I think it's a great skill to have. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Going back to some of these guests that you've had on the podcast, personal branding is a really big topic at the moment. You know, like I've been an athlete. I've made the transition out of the game. I've, I guess, used somewhat of the personal brand that I'd built up from being an athlete into sort of transitioning out of the game and used that to try and help me push things. But some of these guys that you've spoken to and had on as guests are exceptional, you know, personal brands, really. And I guess you've had experience of growing your own personal brand through the podcast. What are some of the things that you've learned about doing that? Because I think my audience, my listeners are probably interested in this, if they're rugby players and that type of thing. So yeah, what have you learned?
I think first things first, there's like an entry point that you must tick off, and that's consistency. You've got to show up in a way that your audience expect you to show up, and that's a frequency thing. If we take that as like the absolute foundation, then we'll go from there. One of the things that I think you might not have heard before, and listeners won't have heard before, but it's been fundamental to a number of my guests, don't be everything to everyone. And that was the whole the C19 conversation you brought up earlier as well. I knew that wouldn't appeal to every single part of my audience, but the people that it really resonated with, they really appreciated that I platformed that. Whereas I think if I was just to be middle of the road, sit on the fence about every issue, people lose a level of connection with you. They don't build that way. And it was Grant Cardone of all people. He's a big fan of the people that like him, really like him, and the people that hate him, best believe they hate him, but they comment for the algorithm, so he benefits in that regard as well. So I think when it comes to a personal brand, be clear what you stand for, because if you stand for nothing, then it's really hard to relate to, it's really hard to connect with. Whereas if I think about you and I look at some of the content that you share, you're talking about your carnivore diet, you're talking about your training, you're talking about your journey as a family and as a dad for the first time. These are all things that you would associate with Adam Ash. If you're somebody that is not sharing actively or is not sharing things that are really them, because those things are things that you're genuinely passionate about, and if I start you talking about them, you're going to talk about them, no problem at all. Whereas you get some people who maybe show things about their life that they want to show, but if you scratch beneath the surface, it wouldn't be particularly deep, and the audience will see that over time. They'll see the authenticity. So if somebody, and it's been really cool with the podcast, somebody will stop me getting off the train in London and be like, oh, hi, are you Colin? I'm like, yeah, that's mad. And we'll have a conversation that's exactly as they would hopefully expect it to be, because that's how I portray myself online. In the same way you and I chatting over WhatsApp to get organised for this, and chatting on my show and then on this show, we've collated a number of hours over that period. We've both been the same person throughout all those different interactions, and it's not been like a filtered version or a kind of different version that's there. So from a personal brand perspective, be really clear on who you're going to be and what you're going to stand for within your brand. And if that means there's a big chunk of the population that really don't fucking like that, cool. They're not going to be your tribe anyway. And I really noticed this on TikTok, for example, when one of my clips breaks out of my core audience and gets into like other parts of the internet, the comments are scathing. Like they hate me. And I'm like, okay, that's cool, because they were never going to be the kind of people to listen to self-development podcasts. So I might as well just turn it up and lean into what I stand for. So if I'm going to talk about personal responsibility, I'm going to talk about the mind following the body in terms of controlling how you feel about your mental health through the actions that you take with your body and what you do with that. People are going to really not like that, but the people that it's meant for and the people that it's going to resonate with, they're going to support me just as much as the people who think that's disgusting or vulgar or Tory or right-wing ideology. I'm like, well, okay, you're never going to be my kind of people anyway, so I might as well just not try and appeal to them. So the guys that are listening to this, thinking about setting up a personal brand, don't try and appease. Really lean into who you are and what you stand for, and you'll see much bigger benefits from it. Yeah,
it's a good thing if you're getting a bit of hatred, like, and it's not
every
nice.
so often.
Like, it's not a bad thing. It means that you're quite clear on who you are, who you want to be, and who you're trying to appeal to. Like, I had an experience, man, like it was only a couple of weeks ago. I wrote something on LinkedIn, and a guy who I know quite well, I'd regard him as like, he's a good mate. He was like, why are you writing that on LinkedIn? Like, it comes across like you're trying to like tell people like how to see something like in a psychological manner. And I was like, and the guy knows me well enough that he can say that to me. And I actually really appreciate the feedback, although it was a bit like, oh shit, like I hope I'm not coming across like that type thing. But when you do start putting stuff out there that you actually do think and feel and believe, and you're willing to say it, you will begin to put some people off. Yeah, that's just the nature of it. But you also will begin to attract people that, you know,
absolutely
like it.
But why would you want, let's say for argument's sake, 1,000 followers that are all pretty neutral to you and they follow you, they're like, yeah, he's all right. Or you could have 100 people that are like, I love what he stands for, I really resonate with it. And guess what? If you ever turn on the monetization tap, those people are really going to fuck with you. They're really going to support you. They're going to join your Patreon, or they're going to buy your Pure Sport, or they're going to invest in Zapati or whatever it is, because they really relate to you. And I've seen this, one of my most played guests is a guest from Glasgow called Richard Dixon, and a lot of people have some misconceptions about Richard because of how he's conducted himself online over the years. But he was working in property investment and development, and the people that were investing in his land deals or his HMOs or his buy, rent, refurbish, refinance, whatever the term is for that, they were all spending tens, hundreds of thousands of pounds to work with him because they really liked him. But there was a percentage of the comment section that were like calling him all the names under the sun, and he was like, okay, cool, because I've got this tribe of people that really want to work with me and support me, and I'd rather that than this big wishy-washy audience that was completely impartial to whether I said whatever I said.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, like, if you think about just your average person who's on Instagram or whatever it might be, any social media platform, you know, they might have 1,000 followers, whatever it is. And they're just, you know, most people are just on there posting their dog, you know, or I'm out for a walk, whatever it might be. I don't think, I still think there's an opportunity for people to click onto the fact that these platforms are tools for you to become much bigger than you are. And I don't mean that in like a way to like build your ego and become this like amazing thing, but in order for you to like make money, have a career, and express things that are important to you, which if you're aligned and you're ethical about it, can create massive impact for people. And I think, you know, athletes are still somewhat waking up to this, and certainly a lot of the athletes that I played with and that, you know, I sort of surrounded myself with they're just not aware of it. There was one or two guys that influenced me. One of my mates was a guy called Billy, who I played with out in LA, and then he played at Chicago as well. But I remember like seeing him posting shit on, this is before I met him, he was posting shit on Instagram, and I was like, that seems like he's kind of like in this for himself in some way. Like it's quite almost like a selfish thing to do. Like I was like kind of building yourself up type thing. But now the way that I think about that is completely different. Billy told me like 2 months after I met him that he made 60k that year on Instagram. And like, why would you not? Like, yeah, you're making money through rugby and stuff like that, but if there's opportunity to
and that'll be there after rugby
and build your wealth,
I would call it digital real estate.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
And you own a portion of that. Now, you don't always own it because social media channels can change whatever. You own your email list. That's one of the key things I've learned over the last little while. And
starting mine soon.
Yeah, exactly. But that is really, really important, as you say, because Billy is building an income now, but also a bit of a foundation for what he might want to do post rugby, because careers don't last forever, as you've demonstrated. There's a time where the rugby tap gets turned off and you need to think about, right, how am I going to earn from myself and my family moving forward? And if you've started to do that when you're still within your career, and I know that's something you're really big on encouraging players to consider, then it's gonna, you're in a much, much better position.
Yeah, and then it's a scary thing to do in a rugby team, because, you know, like you've been in one, there's often quite a lot of judgment, and you know, for instance, the way that I was thinking about my teammate Billy when he was posting stuff, and I'm like,
and you're an open-minded guy as well. There's going to be some closed-minded guys in that dressing room.
I know. Imagine what they were thinking. Anyway, so that was an interesting lesson in like learning about my own psychology, and then being able to take the step into doing that. But it's just the way the world is, I think, nowadays. And I think you're a really good example of that. Somebody who's really consistent, really has their interests and curiosities and talks about them online, and just fucking bangs them out there. Just, your clips.
You never know
put
who's
out
listening as well, Adam. I had a meeting yesterday afternoon with an old client of mine when I was in the insurance space. He dropped me this big long message on LinkedIn, and I've not spoken to him for like 4 years, but I've had the podcast for 4 years. And guess what? He's been listening and watching in the background.
Everyone.
And he's like, oh, when you spoke to this person, I learned this. And we jumped on this call and he came to me with a business opportunity. I've had so many job offers over the last 2 years about like into different sales roles or into like kind of agency roles where they've been like, oh, how you present is really, really helpful and like a really valuable skill. So I've been building in public and people have been watching in private because it's just numbers on a screen. Like I said, like 500,000 on YouTube and 750,000 on audio. I can't see who all those people are. I can see what demographic they come from in terms of the pie charts and the percentages of what country they're in and all that kind of stuff, but I don't spend a lot of time doing that. But there's people and humans behind that. I think social media has conditioned us to think that 50 likes is not a lot of likes. But if 50 people came up and complimented you on something you've done, that would be the most compliments
That's
you've
huge.
ever had in your life. Like think about even when you were at your peak and you had your best game for Scotland, your best game for Warriors. You probably got a lot of messages, but 50 people come over and say, Adam, that was amazing. You'd be exhausted by the end of that because it would just be almost overwhelmingly positive and good. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. So I think some of the young podcasters that I start supporting with my podcast masterclass, they're like, oh, my first episode only got 40 downloads. And I'm thinking, don't worry about it. If 40 people sat and watched the podcast in the studio just now and sat there, we would feel a bit of pressure.
Great event, isn't it?
Yeah, we'd be like, oh, that's interesting. That's amazing. You've all showed up and given me an hour of your time to sit and listen to us talk as well. So I think there's a lot to be said for realizing that the online world, when you transfer that into reality in the real world, actually can have quite a big impact with a very quote unquote small number of people.
Yeah, I totally agree. That is crazy when you think about that. Like 100 likes, if you've got 100 people or 100 views on a podcast, you got 100 people sitting there. That's a fantastic event. That's a really well turned up to event. So that's a good way to frame it up. You spoke about drinking, elective sobriety, a topic that I'm really interested in because I've noticed in my own life that when I've done that for extended periods of time, I've got shit done. Like I've made huge gains in my life, whether it be in business, whether it be spiritually, whether it be in sport. It's something that I can see the power in, and it's probably things that I go in and out of. Like, I mean, I've probably done some 6 months, I've done some 3 months. I think 6 months is the longest. How does that look for you?
I would say for the last decade, I've drank less than 15 times in the UK.
Really?
Yeah, most of my drinking has been around experiences in other countries, whether that's been Ibiza, Dubai, on holidays where I've felt it merited the experience.
Yeah, something different.
But bear in mind, I left university 10 years ago, so I'm 31. So a lot of my benefits from alcohol were in my younger days, where it acted as a social lubricant for new fun experiences, fun friendships, Dutch courage to go and talk to the girls, Dutch courage to go and do the experience in the nightclub that you didn't think you were going to do, and just enjoy yourself and have fun and let loose. I think a lot of those lessons are learned in those days, and the return on investment of drinking on a regular basis diminishes over time consistently. And people that consistently drink on a weekly basis, it becomes habituated rather than a choice. And having those breaks, whether it's 3 months, 6 months, longer, or even just a dry January or a sober October, although I'll tell in a minute why I'm not a big fan of those particular events, they allow you to reset what your relationship with alcohol is and make more conscious decisions that, oh, we're going to go out for Jamie's 26th at the weekend. We're going to go to the same bar in the West End that we went to for his last 5 birthdays. And I'm going to have a stinking hangover for a day, and then the day after that I'm going to be a bit groggy, my training's going to be rubbish, my work's going to be rubbish. Is it worth it? And I'm going to spend 150 quid on drinks and taxis and whatever else you choose to buy on your nights out. You have to make a decision at that point. So for me, elective sobriety has been either long periods where I don't drink at all, or periods where I only drink for a set event that I have in mind at the time. And that's actually helped me develop socially as well. There's lots of other benefits. You have more time, more money, more calories. You have more mental bandwidth as well to assign to different things, because I'm not going to demonize alcohol in its entirety, but if it was invented tomorrow, it would probably be illegal, or at least even more heavily taxed than it is just now, because we don't really know how to deal with it as a substance. It is a depressant after all. But it has its place, but you just have to, in my opinion, reassess what that place looks like for you and not just be swept along by society as well.
Yeah. What would it look like if you started drinking once a week? How would that impact what you're doing?
My training would be nowhere near as good. I wouldn't hold the same physical condition. I wouldn't have the time to do the podcast, to train, to socialise, to excel in my day job as well, because I don't get anything from one or two drinks. I don't love it. And that's probably a problem. Like, I don't come from a place of addiction whatsoever. Like, I'm very comfortable, but I don't really like the taste of alcohol. I like the feeling of 5, 6, 7 drinks when you're on it with all your pals and you're all having a good time and you're getting a bit lady. I enjoy that. Whereas I'm very socially, and this is developed through going to events without drinking. You have to. You become, I feel I'm more articulate, I'm more switched on, I remember what I said, I feel like I can connect better with people and really listen to their cues, because when you're drunk you can be a little bit distracted, or at least hazy. And so I've really developed that. I think if I was to introduce alcohol on a regular basis, I would be vibrating at a lower frequency, and that sounds maybe spiritual, doesn't it? But I know myself that I really don't enjoy the hangovers. I get them really bad, because when you live quite clean with your lifestyle, your sleep, your habits, your routine, it really knocks you out, more so than maybe somebody that does it on a regular basis, because they're more habituated and used to it. In the same way, if I took somebody to do one of your training sessions or one of my training sessions, their body would be pretty battered after it, because their body's not used to it. My body's not used to the sesh. I can't keep up. I'm an amateur. When we go to the beach club in Dubai, I have a few, and the other boys are like, "Whoa, you're getting loose," and I'm like, "Yeah," because I'm not used to this, and I don't weigh very much, so it goes right through me. So yeah, I really think that I would be doing myself a disservice if I added it in regularly, because it doesn't have the return on investment that I'm looking for. And that's a really strict way to look at things, isn't it? But I'm extremely happy with the choices that I make. Like, I love being a designated driver, because I can just leave when it starts to get, like, the conversation starts to drop off, or maybe we're going to a venue that I'm like, okay, I don't really want to go there, because I'm going to either meet people I'm not really a big fan of spending time with, or I'm going to be in an atmosphere where you guys are all out your heads on both drink and whatever else as well, and we're not going to have a conversation that's as aligned. So yeah, I really feel that sobriety has unlocked an awful lot for me to do the things that I want to do, and it allows me to make really conscious choices on what is quote unquote worthwhile for me.
You know, I'm sure you've got friends that love drinking and, you know, go out and do that type of thing, and you probably still hang out with them quite a lot. It sounds like you maybe do. Are they now at a point where they're just like, oh yeah, Colin just doesn't drink?
There's no expectation for me to drink.
No expectation.
Ever. In fact, one of my friends is getting married next year, and for his stag do, he's like, oh, we're going abroad, so does that mean that you'll drink at this? Whereas for his home stag, he knows there's literally pretty much no chance that I'll be drinking whatsoever as well. And that's really cool. One of the things that I'll say for anyone that's experimenting, and I mentioned Sober October and Dry January, the problems I have with those are people lock themselves away for 4 weeks and they cannot wait to get back out. February comes and it's wet February after Dry January, isn't it? And they're like, right, let's get on it, let's get back out, life's not boring anymore. And I'm like, oh, you've done sobriety wrong, because you've shut yourself away. And yes, maybe you saved money by not going out at all, but you haven't given yourself the opportunity to sharpen the sword of socializing without any lubrication. Yeah. So for me, yeah, my friends don't have an expectation for me to drink, but when I show up to events, and this is probably most common, like with my work colleagues, if I go down to London or whatever and we go out after work, they know I'm not going to drink, but I make sure that I'm not sat on my phone in the corner. I make sure that I'm a lively, enthusiastic, engaged presence, because that makes a massive difference.
Yeah, you're bringing the bus still.
100%. So say you went on a night out, Adam, and you're known as a bit of a loose cannon because you're getting right on it. If you then turn up sober and you're a radically different person, they're probably going to want loose Adam. And they're going to be like, mate, we love it when you get on it with us, like, please do it. Whereas I show up and I'm engaged, I'm chatty, I'm friendly, I'm not sitting on my phone doing emails or Instagram or being a recluse, and I don't scuttle off. I stay and I give my wholehearted effort and presence, which is a key thing that we're all struggling to do nowadays, for the time that I'm there. And then at 11, half 11, 12, when they're starting to get like to a level where we can't have a sensible conversation, I'll just shoot off. But they don't hark and hope for a version of me that I would give them if I was on it, because it's not radically different, it's just a bit louder and a bit more enthusiastic.
Yeah. You're still giving a lot of value, and I think that's like, you know, when I've been the guy who's been out and not drinking, it can still be really fun, man. Like, it can be really fun, and I think, yeah,
you choose your events more selectively though, don't you?
Yeah, oh, you do, man. Like, you know, 70-80% of them are just, I know I'm not going, you know, but then the ones that you go to, like, you can still do it. And I think, like, with long sustained periods of no alcohol, you get way smarter. Like, because you kind of, if you're drinking like every week or even every couple of weeks, you're kind of in a fog. Like, you are in a fog, and like, honestly, man, I played like my whole rugby career probably like that. And I mean, I had times of like, 3-4 months of not drinking in my rugby career, but most weekends after the games, like, I think I just needed it. I needed it as a bit of like a stress reliever.
You said you don't think you would have enjoyed rugby as much if you didn't have the social side of drinking, but that's a key consideration.
I know.
You enjoyed that part of it. The juice is worth the squeeze.
Yeah, it was. I don't think if I could have that like stress relief and like enjoyment with the guys after the game, I think I'd have quit 3 years earlier, because I'd just been like, why the fuck am I running into buses, man? Like, I'm running into brick walls. Like, and I know I'm happy to do it if I can get this reward at the end of it, and I quite enjoyed that. But now, I don't know, maybe life's just a bit more balanced, and I'm maybe a bit better at like dealing with the stresses and strains that come with it now that that's been removed, and I just don't feel the urge to do it as much.
Maybe got less to run away from, and I'm not saying that you're running away from things within your career, but escapism's a big part of alcoholism as an actual serious disorder.
Yeah.
But binge drinking, which again, if I drink, I binge drink. Like, I'm completely comfortable with that. I'm not. Yeah, exactly. It's built into us as well. And I don't get anything from the calories of 1 or 2, because I then lose use of my car, and I then still disturb my sleep. Anyone that's worn a Whoop band would absolutely they freak out when they see what alcohol actually does to them, even 1 or 2, which is quite disturbing actually. But I really believe that when you detach from that and you look at what life might be like if you were more selective, you're going to see the benefits.
Yeah, I totally agree. So what are you doing training wise at the moment then? So I seen you up at David Lloyd maybe a couple of months ago. This is before we knew each other, or really knew each other. Where do you train? What do you do? How often are you doing it?
Yeah, I've been in bodybuilding style training for as long as I can remember. Pretty much as soon as I stopped playing rugby, I went full into bodybuilding. I was really inspired by YouTube that I was watching back in like kind of 2012, 2013. Guys called like Christian Guzman, guy called Chris Jones, even like less informative ones like Z's. He was really famous in terms of the whole aesthetics era and movement. So I went into kind of push-pull leg split for as long as I can remember, and that's both science-backed but also actually quite enjoyable from like a pump perspective, or the swell as you call it, Adam. And that's been something I've done for a very, very long time. I've dabbled with more functional stuff. So during the lockdowns, I had access to a garage gym. That was when I was getting called a granny killer for training with my friends and stuff like that as well. Even though we were all well outside of any risk zone or risk demographic for a disease like C19. But I did more functional stuff then, because that was the equipment we had access to, more like what you do at Fly. So that was more like the ski erg, the bike, thrusters and whatever else as well, with the dumbbells, devil's press, all that stuff. Don't remember that fondly at all. That was hard. So I dabbled with that, but then I gravitated again straight back to the bodybuilding stuff as soon as the gyms reopened as well. But I've definitely hit my natural limit in terms of the amount of muscle that I can get on my frame naturally, at the level of leanness that I'm comfortable with. I think the last bulk that I did, I was eating like 4,500 calories, and it was like a part-time job eating and cooking and prepping. And I also, by the time I cut down from that, I think I'd gained like 1.5 kilos of muscle, and it looked largely the same on my frame. So I was like, look, I've probably reached what I want to get to. So now I kind of just maintain at a pretty lean level. I'm pretty diced up. I can eat quite a lot of food to maintain that, because I walk a lot and I train really hard 5 or 6 days a week with weights. But I also introduced in the last 18 months boxing. I've been going to a coach called Sean Lazzarini, who's a pro boxer based out in Govan. And that was primarily driven from not having a physical outlet like I used to have with rugby. One, for aggression, but also for actually being able to use your body and your physique. Because I think there's a lot to be said for looking physically capable, but as a man, I also think you should be physically capable. And I think with the way society is at the moment, there's almost a discouragement of that to some extent in terms of men having an outlet for that, or at least being capable of turning on the monster or the destruction if required. So I started doing boxing once a week, just my brother and I going there, hitting the pads, learning technique, doing a bit of sparring, although it went disastrously wrong and he got a broken nose at one point. not even through like a good punch, but through like my arm slipping through and busting his nose. That wasn't ideal. He's not forgiven me for it. But that was something that I introduced Adam from like an enjoyment perspective, and I think it's sometimes good to be a novice again, because I could go into any gym in the world, whether it's Extreme 2, which you've been training at, which is an unreal atmosphere, or David Lloyd, or Commando X Fit out of Hillington. Those are the kind of 3 that I cycle between. I know exactly what I'm going to do. And if that machine's taken, I'm going to do a variation of it because I've trained for 13, 14, 15 years, however long it was when I started lifting weights back at West of Scotland Rugby Club back in the day. I really have mastery in that area, and I really just train now to look and feel a particular way and to tick a box and get the endorphins afterwards. It's not really for a massive physical result, because I'm not going to look radically different at 31 without deciding to start tickling my bum with the testosterone.
What I was going to ask you about that as well, because I'm sure you've spoken to some people that talk about testosterone and that type of thing. There's more and more people at a younger age who are dabbling in that here. Obviously, I lived in the US for a few years. You know, every second person that you see in the gym, doesn't matter what age they are, they're on TRT. And I know that can have an effect and an impact on like muscle mass, how lean you are, different things like that. Is it something you've looked into much and considered?
When I was more, I did a couple of photo shoots before, like kind of bodybuilder style photo shoots, and I was considering whether I would do like a men's physique competition or whatever else as well. I've definitely been lean enough before, but I never really like practiced the posing or the expression of it, and it never really appealed to me, especially the subjective nature of those competitions where you might think you're the leanest and the most muscular and the most well presented, but the judge has been coaching that guy, so he's going to win or whatever. Yeah, it's a bit mad. That was maybe like 2018, and a couple of my friends who were in that space, in particular when I was growing my Instagram following, they were doing men's physique competitions and they started to dabble with PEDs, and they were doing it from quite a measured perspective. I've interviewed Thomas Maw on my podcast, who's TM Cycles, well known for his content in that space, and he was educating guys on how to actually use them quote unquote safely or with some of less of the downsides. So I really read into it and I knew kind of what I would do. One, I hate needles, and two, it is genuinely a lifetime commitment because you massively alter your hormonal balance by adding exogenous hormones, albeit it could be the same hormones. So we have testosterone in our body already, we're just topping it up. You can trigger things that stop you producing your own natural test in the future if you were to come off. So what you do can have a big long-term impact, and at that stage in my life I wasn't ready to make that commitment. The admin around it is significant if you're doing it quote unquote properly or giving yourself the best chance to do it safely. So it wasn't a consideration for me. Something I have done in the last 3 months is I've used a natural supplement called Tonka Ali, which is heavily researched. I think Pure Sport probably do a version of it now. It's been heavily researched. I spoke to a guy called Lucas Owen, who's an Australian biohacker, and he's all in on it, and I really rate what Lucas is about in terms of the blood work that he's done behind it and stuff like that as well. So I've been using that because at 31 I feel like I am not quite as vibrant as I was at 28, 29. And the last shoot I did was 2022 and I was absolutely peeled. I don't think I could get that peeled now without feeling a lot more lethargic and a lot less energy levels. And I think your body fat set point that you can hover around as your testosterone naturally lowers is actually a little bit higher. That's why you've got the whole quote unquote dad bod thing. Albeit I think that's an excuse. And I feel like Tonka Ali has been like a great low cost but high return supplement in that space, but I've not gone as far as actually injections or anything like that as well. I don't think that's the life for me, unless of course my test plummeted and it became something that was actually medically therapeutic, because a lot of the guys you mentioned in the US that are using TRT are actually using super physiological ranges, which are putting them at some of the risk of the downsides. And I'm sure that's potentially how you actually end up gaining a lot of muscle. Like I don't know the science behind it, but what do you tend to like eat? Do you have much of a focus on what you're eating? Massively so. So I'm not carnivore or anything like yourself, but I've counted my macros and my calories for as long as I can remember, probably since like 2015. And interestingly enough, that was the big thing that changed to actually radically make me look different. That was when I started getting questions on Instagram like, how do you get a six-pack year round or whatever else as well, because I manipulate my food according to my activity and according to my goal. So I've tracked calories for a very, very long time. So I roughly maintain about 3,500, which is a lot to maintain on for somebody my size, but my metabolism, touch wood, is still pretty strong. But the main thing within that is a protein goal and getting at least 90% of that from whole foods. A lot of people talk about 80-20. 20% of 3,500 calories is quite a lot of junk to actually put in your system, and you'll know from switching to pretty much all whole foods within your carnivore, you feel great clarity on it before, albeit I've done those diets where it's been like, if it fits your macros, to like a really extreme where I've fitted in like a Mars bar or a packet of biscuits. And you do actually function differently, because I look at myself, and one of the phrases that I used to go by on Instagram was the office athlete, because I'm trying to function at my peak in front of my laptop and on my sales calls and in the gym. yes, you can maybe look brilliant with eating whatever you want as long as it hits a macronutrient target and a calorie target, but your actual energy level to function in your day-to-day life, whether that's your day job, your sex life, or anything else, will actually be lower because the quality of the food's lower as well. And I think that's one of the big problems we see with ultra-processed foods now as well, Adam.
Yeah. There's like an identity thing going on as well. Like if you just like eradicate all of those foods, like there's something that happens within you that you just begin to see yourself as someone who doesn't eat them, and it just becomes a lot easier. Like you just stop fucking eating them. It's kind of like somebody like, yeah, there's loads of different examples you could use. Like if you stop drinking, you just identify as someone who stopped drinking. Like, and I think that's something that helped me. That's what I liked about carnivore, is it was like, well, and I don't strictly eat carnivore now. I definitely will have like a little bit of yogurt, a little bit of fruit. It's animal based, it's whole food based. But choice isn't always good for us. I don't think it is. You know, choice can create anxiety, and you know, it can create uncertainty. What am I going to have? But if you're just having 5 foods and you stick to those 5 foods, you're going to be flying. You're going to feel great.
And you can use that decision energy into other things that matter. This is why a lot of entrepreneurs wear the same thing every day. If you eat the same things every day, and I get my meal preps delivered on a Monday, my lunch looks the same, my pre-workout meal looks the same, my dinner varies on nights depending on what I've cooked up or what I've got delivered to me as well. And it means that the energy goes towards other things, like what podcast guest can I interview this week, or what am I going to do for at the weekend socially. Those things matter far more. And if I look at you eating 5 different foods, all your energy is going towards Zapati, it's going towards your family, it's going towards the things that really move the dial, rather than what should be a small part of our day. Obviously it has a massive impact, but it's just food at the end of the day. Yeah,
it's an interesting experiment to go through in regards to seeing how much you can get out of yourself. And that's what I want to talk to you about now, is like, you got a full-time job, you got a podcast, you got a lot of things that you're doing, you're trying to grow. What does a day look like for you, and how the hell do you manage doing all these things?
So obviously I say no to a lot of things. We mentioned alcohol for starters. I say no to things that I don't enjoy or want to do. So I'm not going to go climb a hill at the weekend. I'm not going to go to the pub on a Friday night for the 50th time at the same venue we've been to since we were 21 all the time. Albeit I will still go out, obviously. But in terms of a day, I like to get up 6:30, do the ablutions, get hydrated, get my supplements in. I've got a big supplement routine in terms of like what I've taken for the best part of a decade now, in terms of the stuff that I always take. I do a little bit of mobility work. The only injury I've ever had was when I was still playing rugby and we were getting into strength conditioning, and my bench press got way bigger than the ability for my back and my mid upper back to maintain that. So I got like an impingement in my shoulder. And when I finished playing rugby, I was playing scrum half, and you know yourself that there's a repetitive movement of playing scrum half where the hand is coming up and across, and I would wake up the next day with my shoulder round like this because I just developed too strong a chest and too much of an imbalance. So first thing in the morning, I do some band pull aparts, I do some bird dog, I do some hollow core holds, and just some general like band dislocation, stuff like that, to really loosen up. And then I go for a walk with a podcast on. And at this point, I'm trying not to engage the world of social media as well, or WhatsApp, because goodness me, that's busy. So those are like my kind of core fundamental habits to start the day. When I'm on that walk, it could be a podcast that I'm listening to just purely for my own self-development, or it could be research for an upcoming guest, or it could be research on a topic that I'm talking to a guest about, maybe not necessarily that guest that's talking as well. And at that point, I'm taking notes on my iPhone, I'm putting things together, I'm setting out my intentions for what that looks like. And then I get straight back to the desk, and then I'll maybe post some of my clips on LinkedIn, Instagram stories. I'll do some DMs on LinkedIn and Instagram to podcast listeners or to upcoming podcast guests. And then it's day job time between 9 and 12. And during that time, I try and have my personal phone outside the room. Environment design is massive. You just mentioned it there in terms of like if you're a non-drinker or whatever other area you want to get into. So between 9 and 12, that's when I'm doing my quote unquote real job, and I'm really, really working to do that and get on top of that. And then most days I'll probably train at lunchtime at David Lloyd or wherever. If I'm training socially with somebody, I'll go to a commando or wherever else as well, get my session in, and then I'm back at my desk for 1:30, 2 o'clock, showered and eaten, and then I'm back into another work block. During that work block, I'm a little bit less strict, I'm a little bit more reactive in terms of stuff that's coming in, so I'm not doing all my outbound calls or my meetings, and I will reply to DMs intermittently during that time as well. I really believe you can do really well in your job if you do 3 or 4 hours a day of like high quality focused work, because most people are doing 8 hours a day of in and out focus. There's a stat by Cal Newport. It takes us 18 minutes to get back into deep work after getting a notification. Mental. So imagine how much deep work you're actually getting done when you're constantly checking your phone. I know you were writing a course recently for young rugby players or young sports people. You would have probably done your best written work when it was undisturbed, because you were in flow. You were able to just boom, 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 and you weren't pulling yourself out of that at regular periods. But if you were maybe sat there with Instagram and WhatsApp and stuff while you were mid-writing and maybe breaking up your paragraphs every so often, you probably lose your train of thought and you're like, God, this is taking forever to do. So for me, that morning block is super dedicated. That afternoon block is a little bit more sporadic, a little bit more reactive, and I'm kind of ticking both boxes. And then in the evenings, I'm either, if the weather's good, which it hasn't been recently, I'm going to golf, I'm going to the golf range, I'm socialising, I'm seeing friends, I'm going for a sauna, going for a steam, or I'm podcasting, depending on what the frequency looks like as well. So that's what a working day looks like, to tick those boxes. And I really just try and pour myself into things wholeheartedly when I'm in them. Get my movement in, get my training in, get my work in, get my podcast stuff in, and just stay on top of everything as much as possible.
What do you think would happen if, like, all of a sudden you couldn't set goals? Like, what would happen? Like, do you know, maybe you've not thought about it before?
Not thought about it, Adam, but I really believe that I'm very process driven. So the goal with the podcast wasn't to grow it to a top 1% show globally. It was to produce a weekly episode with a conversation I enjoyed and I knew my audience would get value from. So I followed the process. I DM'd the guests, I emailed the guests, I researched them after I booked them in, I delivered the conversation, I listened well, I worked on my craft, I listened back to Game Take in terms of the episode to see what I could do better in terms of my questions, or in terms of my listening style, or in terms of my guidance, or in terms of the frameworks I shared off the back of what the guests said. That was just process driven. So if you removed all goals or all aims for me to go towards, I think I'd be a bit lost, but I could definitely fall back on doing the things that I know are going to move me towards something that is of value to me, or something that is in line with who I am as a person. And I think that's something that a lot of people need to do. They need to strip back. What do I actually want to look like? What does Colin or Adam or Jamie or whoever's listening to this, what does the version of you in 2025 look like? What does that person do? How do they spend their time? Who are they surrounded by? What do they eat? What do they wear? What do they listen to on podcasts? What do they subscribe to on social media? How do they talk to themselves? All these different things you can break down. And then guess what? Then you're going to start to fill out your day and your diary and your week and your month to understand that the things are going to aim towards that version of you in 2025.
Yeah. My answer in short would be the same as yours. Like, if you removed all goals, would fall apart, like, completely. Like, you'd just die. Like, even if you go down to the kind of just getting up and getting to eat some food, you know, like, we would completely. So yeah, the reason I ask you that is because you're definitely somebody who's getting a lot done. You're productive, and I think you've really tapped into, like, the value of that, and have managed to structure your life in a way where you're a really good example of it. And I sometimes think that, like, it's something that I'm working on and getting better at as I'm sort of transitioning out of a 10-year professional sports career where I've had to turn up to work every day and I've been told what I'm doing. You know, I follow a schedule. All right, cool, right, lunch is ready at this time, etc. But yeah, you touched about, you know, my course that I wrote. My best work gets done early in the morning, so I get up and I do my best. All my work, my good stuff gets done early in the morning, first thing, same time as you, 6:30. But it's interesting, you know. I think there's a lot of time in the day where we're fucking about, you know, and if you can become self-aware of that, you can squeeze a lot of juice out of the hours that we have during the day. Your
fucking about can become productive fucking about as well. So there's a guy called Gary McGowan that I followed for years and years and years on Instagram. He's an Irish fitness coach, but he's also a doctor, and I think he might still practice medicine, but he does a ton, right? So I always looked up to him. I was like, wow, how does this guy get so much done? So I now kind of relate to him, given all the things that I'm juggling as well. And he talks about different levels of procrastination. So procrastination for him, when he's meant to be studying for, like, the next exam that he's got as a junior doctor, whatever, would be like replying to client emails for his coaching business, or it would be replying to DMs on Instagram or LinkedIn. That's like productive procrastination. Now, it's busybody work and it doesn't always fulfill you, but it needs done at some point. So he moves task to maybe a slightly lower leverage or value task, but he's still doing a task. So when we fuck about during our day, if we can do something that's fulfilling rather than maybe scroll TikTok or scroll
mindless.
Reels. Switch out to something that's maybe slightly higher leverage, because we're not going to be monks and we can't be perfect, Adam, but we can maybe include more things in our day that are helpful. And again, I didn't mention, but I time box my day, so I roughly know what's going to happen during different periods. And there is genuinely periods in my day where it's walk and phone admin. So I'm walking and I will be blasting out phone admin during that time, and I've agreed that that's the thing that I'm going to do during that time. So it's conscious. I think when we do things unconsciously, so unconscious fucking about, that's when we start to have big black holes in our day where we don't know what we were going to do and what we did, and then we look back and we think, I didn't get an awful lot done.
Yeah, I've had that experience before. I'd regard you, would you regard yourself as an entrepreneur?
I'm an entrepreneur in work, so I run a sales division within my division that's responsible for millions of pounds worth of revenue, and I'm responsible personally for like a percentage of that. So that's entrepreneurial. The podcast is an entrepreneurial venture, I would say so, yeah, but it's not like a business in the sense that Zappity or Pure Sport is, but yeah, we're maybe working towards that, Adam.
Yeah. I think that you'll be able to answer this question quite well, and it is an entrepreneurial question, but like, you know, I think one of the things that makes entrepreneurship hard is that like there's just so much fucking uncertainty, man. You put a podcast clip out and you might have a thought in your head like, is this appropriate to put out? You've probably had that thousands of times. But that's just an example of one thing, you know, when you're really sort of putting the foot down and putting stuff out there on social media and wearing your heart on your sleeve, I guess. Like that's a way you could put it, because you're putting yourself out there. How have you found the battle with like dealing with the sort of pain of uncertainty? Is it something that you've had to come up against much?
Yeah, I always hark back to this how and why piece. I'm really clear what I want to do and why I want to do it. I think maybe there's a level of fear of uncertainty because I have stayed in a day job where I'm happy. Yes, I've changed sectors and I've pushed in the right direction. I've really like driven something forward and really seen fiscal and personal growth within that. But bear in mind, I've still got that safety blanket. So the podcast for me is still quote unquote play to some extent.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's still fun, yeah, exactly that. And there's not a massive fiscal risk to it. Like, I invest really hard into the podcast. All the sponsorship money, the companies that have supported me and the brands that have supported the show, that money's getting reinvested into studio costs. It's getting reinvested into my clips editor, into my thumbnail guy that's producing the best quality content for a podcast that was basically run out of my bedroom in the suburbs of Glasgow. So there's a level of uncertainty. If I was to go all in on that, I think that would be more uncomfortable. But I still have the certainty of my revenue from my day job, albeit nothing's taken for granted. I went through a redundancy in 2019. I moved company, and 12 weeks in, they got bought by an American hedge fund and they made their entire UK operation redundant. So that was uncertainty, because you're still just a number on the dashboard. But I think there's a level of certainty in my skill set that I could walk into a head of business development role or a head of sales role at many different organizations, many different industries. So you can create some certainty through the skill set you build, the reps that you do, and the practices that you have. But I think on the side of anything that you really care about or really stretches you, there's going to be some uncertainty that you almost have to build some comfort with. And you're definitely somebody that's done so many different things. You must be comfortable with the fear of it.
Yeah, I'm definitely quite comfortable with fear. I've experienced loads of different fear, from like fear of things. Like, for instance, fear of playing my first senior men's rugby game. That's a fear. But also more on like a physiological, in a physiological way as well, because I've had like I've experienced like proper panic. Like that's real fear. That's like internal fear that doesn't necessarily have a reason for it, and that stemmed off the back of like nutrition stuff and cutting down too quickly and being dehydrated from training insanely hard through a pre-season. So I've experienced a lot of different fear like that, and I think it's a really good teacher. But I do agree, like, I think it makes sense often when there's not too much like financial implication on the line. Fear and uncertainty is different in business when that is in the line, like on the line.
If that's the bread winner or the the thing that pays the bills, it is different.
Yeah. What about from a personal point of view? Like, because, like, you know, I sometimes talk about like recreating yourself in the public eye and like changing who you are. And I think it's like a healthy part of life to evolve. Like, we're going to like different things. We're going to start to have different interests. You're somebody that will have done this at least once. I know when you started your podcast and people started looking at you as a podcast guy. What's your experience been of that? Like, you know, you've now stuck to this for the best part of 4 years. And was it hard to do that? Was it hard to take that leap?
Of course it is, because people look at you differently, as you say. They also sometimes think like, oh, why on earth should you do that? And that's cool. Like, they're actually allowed to pass those judgments, because it's evolutionary to not do something that's outside the tribe, because you face rejection, like we spoke about from a sales perspective. It is a big, big risk. But one of my big mottos, and this is borrowed from my good friend Bryce Bell, who's been on my podcast, and he'll come back on once certain issues are out of the way in his lifestyle. You'll maybe hear more about that another time, Adam. But make social media social. So when I recreated my identity as a content creator on Instagram back in the day, and then to go on to become a podcast host, I made social media social with the kind of people that I wanted to spend time with. By posting about my interests, things that I liked, I started to connect with people that were doing the same things. Now, just because they were interested in fitness or self-development or investing or crypto or whatever else, didn't mean that we would have connections on everything else. And there's many people that I met that maybe that was the only commonality that we had, so we didn't become friends, we became decent acquaintances. But I've made many, many friends through the content I've created, because I've filtered the kind of people that want to spend time around me but by similar interests. And like, you and I will probably go for a gym session at some point. We'll probably go for some food at some point as well, because we've connected through the things that we share values on. Like, one of your big values is clearly freedom, because we spoke about the C19 stuff offline, where you were like, okay, this is against my value set. A lot of my friends are people that were pushing back during that period of time, because we shared that. And guess what? We're also interested in training. We're also interested in golf. We also support maybe the same football team, whatever. So there's lots of overlaps from that perspective as well. So I think when you reinvent your identity, you give yourself the chance to find new people around you that support that new identity, and they enable you to create an environment that allows you to fulfill that level of identity, or that kind of highfalutin goal that you've got of the kind of person that you want Adam to be or Colin to be. By redefining that identity and just wholeheartedly living it, you start to attract people towards it. I spoke about this the other day. Run clubs are springing up everywhere, aren't they? There's a reason for that. People are lonely, and they're looking for connection with like-minded people. Now, you might go to the run club, and out of the 20 other guys that you chat to on that day that you chat to, only 5 of them have interests that are in line with yours beyond just running. But all 20 are interested in running, aren't they? Yeah. But 5 of them might be interested in the same stuff you're in. They might work in a similar sector to you. They might try and start the same business in the area as you. They're going to become probably closer friends of yours than the people you went to school with, the people you went to uni with, or the people that you played in the same sports team as when you were in your teens, because you've now, at whatever age you are now, found people who are more aligned with you. And that's why I say make social media social, or real life stuff. Go to the CrossFit class, go to the run club, go to the thing where people who are like you spend time.
That's a really good way to put it. It is, I guess, a filtration system, isn't it? Putting stuff out that you like, you're going to filter out the people that don't like it and bring in people that do. So that's nicely put. I did wonder what your stance on that would be, but that is some good insight there. I'm just looking at the time here, and we've been cracking on here for a bit, and I've still got about 6 questions to go, but I think we might have to do a round 2 at some point. But listen, that was really good. Some really good insight there. And it's just really impressive, I think, to hear the journey that you've been on. For me, what stands out is the consistency. You know, what you've built is actually pretty incredible. You know, I don't know the stats on podcasting in Scotland, but you must be up there with one of the top guys or the top people in the podcast game. Personally, I have watched a couple of your just where you talk to the camera. I don't know, what do you call it? It's a solo podcast episode. They're really, really valuable. The one that you put up recently about some of the biggest lessons you'd learned through speaking to all these different people on the podcast is a really, really good listen. So anybody who is interested in that, definitely give it a listen, because it was valuable. There was a lot of really insightful, interesting things popping up there. But appreciate you coming on, chatting and connecting once again. And yeah, good luck with everything. I'm sure we're going to do this again.
I think we will. My pleasure, Adam. Thanks for having me.